In the Belgian Grand Prix, Max Verstappen won the race after starting 6th on the grid, taking the lead of the race by lap 14 itself. While that is not surprising, considering the extraordinary pace the RB19 is exhibiting under the hands of the Dutchman, what if I told you that Max and Red Bull were deliberately slowing down during the race? The first question that comes to your mind might be, why? Well, in today's video, let me tell you how we figured out Red Bull were deliberately losing lap time during the race, and let's uncover why the Bulls actually were doing that over the Belgian race. Red Bull, after introducing a major upgrade to its side pods at Hungary, the RB19 has had a sudden surge of pace, which was evident from Max's performance around Budapest. The Austrian squad has been on fire, winning all 12 races so far this season, with championship leader Verstappen having won the last 8 of those races consecutively. Red Bull won both the sprint and the race at Belgium, with Max Verstappen dominating the entire race weekend. Despite being around 1 second faster than the rest of the grid during qualifying, the team was scrutinized for deliberately being slow over the Grand Prix. Two-time world champion Max Verstappen brushed off any doubts about the team's sandbagging, suggesting that Red Bull has been running on full pace, but just were limited by tire performance. He stated that the drivers do not have the ability to push the tires over the course of a race stint, due to the tires falling off the cliff sooner than if they were maintained properly. It's the peak of the tires. It's draining the battery to really do the best lap you can. And if you keep that pace up, you just degrade your tires. The whole race, you are always pace managing. You can ask any driver, they all drive like that. Because if you keep doing what you try to achieve on a lap like that, you will have to pit within 5 laps again for new tires. I could have won by more, I could have won by less. It's strategy related, tire related. But I think how we did it worked really well. Even though the Dutchman persisted that his teammate and himself were not sandbagging around Spa, the suspicions still were there as it was. So let's take a look at the telemetry data and see if really the Red Bulls were deliberately slowing down. The stint data was what caught our eyes first, as the final stint, other than Max's fastest lap, was rather very consistent. And for reference, I took the telemetry of lap 35 of Perez, Verstappen, and Hamilton. This was where things started to get pretty interesting. As you can see, over the course of the lap, Hamilton is over a second slower than Verstappen, while Perez is about half a second adrift. But when you take a closer look, on the first sector, Hamilton was actually half a second up on Verstappen, and he lost all that advantage on the middle sector. From Hamilton's side, losing time on Sector 2 is expected, considering his car was running a low downforce rear wing, but Max and Perez losing time to the Mercedes on Sector 1 was not expected, as we all know how aero-efficient the RB19 is. Upon making a closer inspection, we can see that both Red Bulls start to lose lap time to Hamilton around turn 2 and 3, around Eau Rouge. We all know that Eau Rouge is a pretty flat-out corner, but both Verstappen and Perez were lifting off on that particular high-speed corner, compromising their entry onto the Camel Straight. This is why by the end of the straight, both Red Bulls lose about half a second to Hamilton on the first sector itself. For a car to go flat around Eau Rouge, the car has to have a lot of downforce, and the Red Bull is not shy of that. That is why we took a close look at the Red Bull's qualifying laps, and we clearly can see no liftoff around Eau Rouge by both Red Bulls. So clearly, there was nothing wrong with the car during the race, as it is pretty clear that both Red Bull drivers did deliberately lift off around that high-speed corner. But why would they do that? Max, after the Belgian Grand Prix, mentioned that he showed relatively slower pace around the race, as he mentioned that he was nursing his tires throughout his stints. So first, let's analyze if the tires was the limiting factor. Tire degradation was something that the race engineers and drivers were talking about a lot throughout the race. Most drivers, especially ones at the front, spent a long time on the soft tire first stints, trying to manage it as long as they can. Hamilton of Mercedes did his stint by attacking the first and third sectors, while giving up time on the second sector, where lots of corners are present. But the Red Bull were doing it completely oppositely. While both Red Bulls were lifting off at Eau Rouge, which is a high-speed corner where they can save tire life, both Bulls were pushing hard on the second and third sectors, where a lot of more corners are present. Lifting off around Eau Rouge, a high-speed corner is beneficial for saving tires, but after that corner is a long straight, and compromising your entry where a lot of lap time could be found does not make sense. Drivers could save lots of tire life through Sector 2, where there is more corners present and less straights. But according to the telemetry data, the Red Bulls were not doing that. That means the tire degradation factor comes out of the equation. Were Red Bull sandbagging? This is a question that lots of F1 fans are asking nowadays, and that is a stupid question, to be honest with you guys. If Red Bull were actually sandbagging, why would they push on the second and third sectors? That just makes no sense. So sandbagging is out of the list. That brings me to the third option, which I and many F1 analysts think was the case with Red Bull. That is, ride heights and car setups. After our explanation, that would make so much more sense to you guys, so don't go anywhere. Why could ride heights be a problem for Red Bull? It is all down to how the engineers set up the car for that particular race weekend, because it is clear that both Red Bull drivers were able to take it flat out on Eau Rouge during qualifying, but they did not choose to do it on the race. And GP was constantly asking Max to use his head, and I think he was referring about taking it smooth around Eau Rouge, rather than trying to save tires. Well, maybe Red Bull were concerned about skid wear legality. We all know that the FIA has this rule on plank wear, and only a wear of 1 millimeter is allowed. The FIA do police that rule very strictly, and these skids are placed on 4 positions around the floor. As we mentioned before, a wear of more than 1 millimeter is not tolerated, and for the past decade, we have not seen a driver been disqualified from classification due to excessive plank wear. During this year's Belgian Grand Prix, only 2 cars were sparking around Eau Rouge, those being the Mercedes and Red Bull cars. Those sparks mean that the skids, the plank underneath, is brushing against the racing tarmac, which is how the wear is caused. The sparking is due to the immense downforce these ground effect cars generate. The compression on a high-speed flat-out corner like Eau Rouge with lower ride heights could mean excessive plank wear. The margin between legal and illegal is very fine. Therefore, the teams have to be very careful on this area. But how did Red Bull find themselves in this position? Well, there are 2 potential reasons behind this, pointed out by the former Red Bull performance engineer Blake Hinsey on the channel Break F1. So let's see what those reasons might be. The first is the general car setup. Maybe due to the entire race weekend being affected by rain, Red Bull could have settled the car for a lower ride height, expecting a rain-affected sprint and Grand Prix. While the sprint was rain-affected, the Grand Prix had dry running. What most people do not know is that the wet and intermediate tires are larger in diameter when compared with the slick compounds. Red Bull could have effectively set up their car for the wet and intermediate tires, compensating for the difference in tire size with a lower ride height. This is a slightly reasonable explanation, but I don't think any team would set up the car for wet conditions if they are not sure of what the weather is going to be like, and that certainly was the case around the Belgian race weekend. The second reason is the race weekend itself. The Belgian Grand Prix this year was a sprint weekend, so every team is limited to just 1 practice session to set up their respective cars. And if you guessed right, yes, that practice session was a wet one. Maybe, just maybe, Red Bull could have set up their cars according to what they saw on that practice session and then realized when the cars were on Parc Fermé, maybe they might have gone a bit too low on ride height. The teams do have sensors to monitor the loads on different parts of the car, and maybe during the race, they realized it and asked their drivers to slow down around Eau Rouge, lose a bit of lap time, and still win the race with all legalities still on check. So we still do not know how much of an advantage the Red Bull has over its closest rivals on track. But if we had to make a guess, Max Verstappen lost about half a tenth around the first sector, which means he lost about 22 seconds to third-placed Charles Leclerc around Spa. But on the hands of Verstappen, that Red Bull is a beast, even if he is taking things easy. That was pointed out by Sky Sports F1 pundit Martin Brundle, as he went on to say. Perez in the other Red Bull was 22 seconds behind. Such was Verstappen's command over his ever-willing car. When Max caught Sergio, it was if he was in a different car. That one is for the conspiracy theorists to seize on, because he was able to take tighter lines and still get better exit traction. He's found a way to carry speed while continuing to babysit the Pirellis. It's a touch feel and finesse that's very difficult to learn and achieve in my experience. So there you have it. Red Bull are definitely not sandbagging. They're just taking it easy on themselves to keep themselves on a safe position. Yet, on average, Max is around half a second faster than his teammate, and is nearly a second faster than the next fastest car on the grid. That begs the question, who is really going to dethrone Max and Red Bull from the top step of the podium? Can anyone actually achieve that feat on the second half of this season? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section down below. We'd love to discuss it with you. And on your way down, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to get notified of our future uploads to keep yourselves up to date about the 2023 Formula One season.